Glad you are with us for International Podcast Day 2017. And before we get going, because we're going to have to, we've lost some time here, we're going to have to kind of pick up the pace. I want to talk about a couple things very briefly. First of all, in many respects, podcasters move people, whether it's through advice, entertainment, education, or it could be even comedy. We have a voice in this world, and it can be very pronounced. Over the past few months and around the globe, numerous natural disasters have impacted many lives, which include human tragedy. As voices of the world, each of us can aid those in desperate need, whether it's financial, through organization, or just reaching a hand out. As we prepare for International Podcast Day, please remember those and help wherever you can. Podcasters helping people. Please remember that. Podcasters helping people. I think it's very, very important. So as we start to progress, there's certainly two things that I need to do off the top of that, right off the bat. And that is thank these other two gentlemen right here. This week has been very tough to pull off International Podcast Day this week because of some very unique circumstances we ran into. And without the dedication, hard work, desire, you come up with any word, they have possessed it this week and have made this possible. And I'm so proud of the founders of International Podcast Day, Dave Lee and Daniel J. Lewis. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for the thought, Steve, of International Podcast Day, which started in 2014. And it's great to go out there and connect with the individual podcasters from the 14 different countries that we had represented this year, 50 plus podcasters. It's great to just be a part of the conversation. And of course, without the podcast and the podcasting community, this event would be nothing. So thank you, Steve, for the vision and as far as where we've gone today. And it's great to be a part of just a great trio of people that love the space and just want to continue to explore and create a movement around podcasting, continue to celebrate. Daniel?
I remember 4 years ago when this little guy with this huge mustache came to me. It was the first time we'd ever met in person. And he said, "Hey, what do you think of maybe doing a day, some kind of national podcast day or a podcast day, making it some kind of actual global event to celebrate podcasts?" And it was an inspiring idea. And 2 years later, we actually got it launched with our first International Podcast Day or National Podcast Day back then in 2014. And to see now how it has been received globally, recognized, observed in many places, celebrated. And this is not just a day for the podcasters. We're all podcasters. Probably the majority of people right now celebrating are podcasters. But this is a day for the world, not even only for the podcast fans, but this is to celebrate the incredible messages that we can share out there. There are people who are able to share a message through a podcast that they can't share anywhere else. Maybe it's controversial. Maybe it's coming from some place where they're not allowed to share a message in some kind of foreign nation where that kind of message is suppressed. Maybe it's a message that they felt no one would be interested in hearing, but they simply wanted to share that message. And they have an audience now because of podcasts. That could be a small audience. It could be a big audience. The size of the audience doesn't matter. It's the passion that we have in podcasting, this connection with others, whether it's the podcast that we listen to and we enjoy and we feel like we're getting to know the hosts and build a friendship with them, or it's the audience that we're getting to know and enjoy relationships with as we are podcasters reaching an audience. And that's what today is celebrating. That power of podcasting, the power of podcasts to inspire, to change lives, to save lives in some cases, to radically change the world, one earbud at a time, maybe. It could be our new slogan. But that's what we're celebrating.
Well said. And, it's been a year since the last one already. And we've not only learned a lot in terms of what we're doing with our celebration, but what's been going on in the industry and within podcasting. And since we do this the 30th of September of every year, I thought it'd be interesting to go back in history and what else has happened on September 30th. So let me give you a quick idea. In 1776, on September 30th, Washington blamed the militia for their problems. I can relate. 1927, on September 30th, Babe Ruth hit 60th home run of the 1927 season. In 1935, on September 30, Johnny Mathis was born. In 1949, the Berlin airlift ended. In 1955, James Dean was killed in a car accident. In 1962, on September 30, riots over desegregation of Ole Miss. In 1968, Humphrey announces that he would halt the bombing in Vietnam. In 2005, Eisner, the CEO of Disney, resigned. And you're not going to believe this. In 2017 was the 4th annual International Podcast Day.
That's shocking. I had no idea that was coming.
I didn't lead up to it, right, or what? But what it shows is there's always historical events, and we now hold a date in what we're doing, and I really think it's great. So I want to, Dave, turn it over to you briefly to talk about some of the sponsorships that we have going on, because folks, I tell you what, I don't care what kind of business you're in, what kind of event you're trying to produce. It's those that collectively pull together and want to come to a common cause that make it happen. It's just not the three of us, but an accumulation of a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some amazing sponsors this year that continue to support us year in, year out. And these are companies and businesses that truly enjoy the podcasting space, that enjoy to bring new podcast and recommendations to everybody. And so we have some really cool sponsors this year supporting the event. Blueberry, of course, is our platinum sponsor. Blueberry is a full service podcasting company providing podcast hosting, podcast stats, and advertising opportunities to podcasters. Blueberry is the home of the PowerPress podcasting plugin for WordPress. And of course, today, Blueberry offers free WordPress hosting and pro podcast stats with every podcast hosting account. They also offer free media migration and 25% monthly overages allowance on all media hosting plans. And of course, as a sponsor, they will be taking over 2 hours of our schedule beginning tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And they'll be sharing podcast problems, what to do when things go wrong. And then Todd Cochran, the CEO of Raw Voice and Blueberry, will be taking the stream over at 6 p.m. talking about proven social media strategies for podcasters. So make sure you head out to our schedule page, bookmark those, and of course, pay a visit to them at blueberry.com. Guys, I'm really excited to bring our gold sponsor this year, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. It is a working cafe serving the finest espresso in coffee drinks. And here's the kick. Within the coffee shop is 2 full working podcasting and vodcasting studios where podcasters will be scheduling their time to do their podcast in front of their live studio audience. And of course, the grand opening of Studio 21 happens on International Podcast Day. So they'll be serving up the finest coffee drinks throughout the day. They'll be having gifts to all those that attend. They'll be broadcasting throughout the entire day. Pay them a visit at studio21podcast.cafe. And of course, our good friends, Chris Kremitzos and the other gentleman that produced the fine Messengers, a podcast documentary. This is a journey through the modern world of podcasting that's uncovering the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Produced, of course, by award-winning filmmakers, the documentary chronicles the nationwide growth of podcasting, as well as where it's going to be in the future. So get your copy of The Messengers, a podcast documentary, over on iTunes and on Amazon by visiting them at themessengersdoc.com. Finally, gentlemen, our silver sponsor this year is Podable. Are you looking for your next favorite podcast? Podable is revolutionizing podcast discovery by providing podcast recommendations tailored to you. With endless episodes, a robust recommendation engine, and streamlined social share capabilities, you're guaranteed to find podcasts you'll love. So go beyond listening to what's popular and start transforming your podcast listening experience. Start finding your personalized moments of podcast discovery with Podable by going to play.podable.co. That's play.podable.co. And finally, gentlemen, thank you to our bronze sponsors, the Audacity Podcast, Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. So without those three amazing gold and silver sponsors, this event would not be what it is. Thank you for the support. Make sure you give them a visit. And with that, Steve, I'll turn it back over to you, and we can talk about the schedule here in a little bit as well.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, and I really appreciate that and the support from all agencies that support us in our outreach around the world to podcasting. Dave, there is also some amazing things that go on around the world and it's really important to us that people do their own thing for International Podcast Day, whether it's holding up a meetup. We've seen pub crawls where they go from bar to bar and listen to a different podcast and some amazing things. So folks, if you go over to our website, there is a page there that has all the events that people have submitted to us, what they're doing for International Podcast Day. So where is this event located? I know a lot of you right now are on the International Podcast Day website where we've got chat going on. And certainly as the hours progress, you're going to see this chat room start exploding with a lot of people, a lot of comment, a lot of great information. So it's worth coming to internationalpodcastday.com/live to watch the event. However, some people have preference. There is also a stream going on right now on our Facebook page. It's on YouTube, but we really want you over here because that's where the chat action is. And I really want to thank David from EchoCast. This is being simultaneously broadcast. So if you're in your vehicle or just need the audio while you're cleaning the house, whatever the case may be, you can go to eplex.xyz. That's eplex.xyz and listen to an audio-only stream. And that'll be up during the full 30 hours of our broadcast. And one last thing, if you're in our chat room on internationalpodcastday.com/live, for your convenience, in the bottom right-hand box, there is a little thing that you can check mark to bring the chat into a new window. So if you'd like a bigger approach to what's going on in the chat room and having the live stream going on, please do so. So what is International Podcast Day? And to be honest with you, it's evolved over time, and it's truly a celebration for podcasters, listeners, the industry, and those, which is real important to us, those which have never heard of podcasting. And since 2016, we have also involved, and we have some spectacular things coming your way from 14 different countries around the world. I probably answered this question online, in emails, in voice, than any other question about what we're doing, period. And that is, why are you starting on the 29th when podcast day is on the 30th? I understand it can be a little confusing. The reason is we're starting now in the US is because it already is International Podcast Day in New Zealand and Australia. And here, when we're finished, our first speaker is actually in Australia, which it is, I believe, late morning on September 30. So that's why. Guys, before I go through some comment of some questions we pose to communities out on the internet, why don't you just take a brief moment to kind of reflect, I would say, not necessarily where our event and our motivation to what we're trying to do is, but where you really see podcasting kind of changed or moved in between our last event.
Well, it's really interesting because as we talk about International Podcast Day and what is it, we've talked about that. It's a collective effort from the entire podcast community to celebrate the power of podcast. It's about sharing the important role podcasts play in our daily routine. It's about recognizing that podcasts expose us to people, ideas, parts of the world that we never thought we would meet, right? And so here, as compared to 2016, we notice incremental growth throughout the globe in different regions of the world where podcasting is continuing to grow. So for me, as I've been putting the schedule together, the last couple of years, we were heavily favored towards the United Kingdom, the Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and also the Australian areas. But as we know, the Brazilian podcasting space has exploded. The Philippines, places in Taiwan, we can go all over. China, Japan continues to grow. And this year specifically, Steve, we've noticed that the African nations have really been growing in stature, in volume, not only with interest, but volume of podcasters and podcast listeners. So compared to last year, this year, we have a number of African-based podcasters from Ghana to South Africa to Zimbabwe to Nigeria, of the world that we would not have been connected with last year. And so as the community, as the industry of podcasting moves and grows internationally, so does our event. And so year in, year out, we notice reflections of what's going on in the podcast space to our event. Also, one final thing, I'll pass it to you, Daniel, is that we've noticed a lot of listener-based communities popping up. Podcast Brunch Club, Earbuds Collective, Audible Feast. There's a lot of podcast recommendation newsletters out there. And so we are also reflecting that this year with everything that we're doing. It's just not, as Daniel said at the top of the hour, it's just not about the podcaster and how to improve podcasting. We're specific. It's a celebration of podcasts, and it is all those things. So we have a lot of listener-based communities that aren't behind the mic, but they are growing the industry day in and day out, month after month, with their meetups, with their newsletters, with their podcast recommendation newsletters, and any sort of online social sharing that they do. So I think compared to last year, to 2017, those are a few of the striking elements that we've adapted to and we've evolved based on the growth of the podcasting space.
Yeah, and to see that podcasting has its origins in the grassroots. Unlike other forms of media that have come from the top down, corporate created it, corporate mandates certain rules and such, and to get on certain platforms, you have to start from somewhere at the top or get access in some way. Like if you want to have a broadcast radio station, you have to talk to the FCC in the United States, and other countries have their own regulations. But podcasting is from the ground up. It's the independent creators who started it. Like you look at Adam Curry, Dave Weiner, the guys who really gave podcasting its foundation, created the framework for what we use today. And the same thing for helping the podcast to grow. And I'll be talking about this in my session tomorrow, how to help podcasting grow. But you have to look not at these big companies to bring podcasting down to the masses, or the big name podcasters to bring a lot of popularity. Now, we do appreciate hugely what they're doing in the space. And I believe a lot of the growth in the space is thanks to them. And I think the real power is in you and I, you watching this, and I, and fellow podcasters, fellow podcast fans. We who are still at the ground roots of podcasting, we're the ones who can grow this. We're the ones who can say to our friends, hey, did you hear this podcast? Or, hey, you got to listen to this cool podcast I just discovered. Check this out, or learn this new thing, or listen to this thing I heard on a podcast. We are the ones with the real power to help podcasting grow. And that's in any country. It doesn't matter where you are when you're watching or listening to this. Anywhere that has an internet connection can be a place that can have access to podcasts. I know there are some regulations and filtering in certain places, firewalls and such. There are creative ways to work around that. But there are incredible messages out there. And maybe you're in one of those places. Maybe you're in Zimbabwe, or maybe you're in Croatia, or in some country where you feel like maybe you are the one and only podcaster in your country. You're probably not. And it's amazing to be able to say that today with fair certainty that every country probably has a podcaster in it, or a few. And finding those podcasters, connecting with them, you can bring podcasting to big attention in your country. And it not have to be the, hey, we're catching up with the United States. No, it's, hey, we're sharing messages in our language, in our culture, in our own way. That's the incredible power that we have as the independent content creators in podcasting.
I love what you guys said, because I think it shows truly that podcasting has, in its own way, shrunk the world some. And as you're going to see over the next 30 hours, when we bring in various guests from different countries, as Dave was mentioning, there are areas of geography or culture where they're just now starting to hear about this. You're going to see some of these people presenting in their own native language, their own tongue, which is always a unique thing. And I have to say that, based on what you guys said, is that we are attempting to do two things here. Number one is celebration. It's a party. And can I have a Yahoo International Podcast Day, folks? I mean, it's a party. I mean, let's get it on and evangelize and talk to people about our craft, about what we do. Pull out your phone. Somebody hasn't heard of one? Show them how to get it. Show it how to get it. And it's really important that we spread this world. I mean, if we're not willing to evangelize what we think is great, what's important, what you can learn, to have that intimacy with something in your ear, with somebody talking to you about something you're passionate about or that you want to laugh about, that's how we change the world. That's how we pull people closer together. I mean, I think probably the majority of people on the chat right now are podcasters, but that's going to change over time as we progress. But if you take a survey of them, and because of their podcast, how many new close friends they have because of podcasts, I think the number would be pretty high. Some of my closest personal friends are podcasters now. Because where I live, nobody else in the world lives. So I have no neighbors, so I have no life, so I have no friends. So, but that's just me. But there are wonderful communities out there for assistance, for guidance, and as we attempt to shrink this and make it more wholesome for everyone, I think we're in a much better place, because, as we've talked about year after year, the power of podcasts is real. It is fact. It is not fiction. It's just not social media posts and blabbing. There's statistical analysis that proves every aspect of this. And I think that's part of the equation that drives the three of us to really put our hearts and efforts every year towards International Podcast Day. You guys got quiet.
And there's quite a lineup of great content coming from great speakers. Some of these people we've gotten to know, some of them I think we've met for the first time as they're wanting and popping up and saying, hey, I want to participate. I want to share a message on International Podcast Day. And what you said, Dave, about some of our closest friends are from podcasting, that's totally true. I think especially maybe for the entrepreneurs in the space, like me, or the people who work in our homes, or maybe sometimes literally in our closets most of the day, that we get to connect with people, listening to their messages in our ears, taking their voices with us, letting them letting their voices take us places. I look at it now, especially since I work by myself, I'm that entrepreneur. I see some of my closest friends are in podcasts. Some of the people I trust the most are in podcasts. And even my quote competition, unquote, are some of my closest friends and some of my most trusted allies. And because we're approaching passions from the same perspective or slightly different angles, and the connections that we have in the podcasting space with fellow podcasters, with our audience, and the connections that audience members are building with each other. Like, boy, talk about a passionate audience. I've started listening to the No Agenda podcast by the Podfather, Adam Curry, and his audience arranges meetups with each other, like unofficial meetups, fan meetups, fellow knights of the No Agenda Roundtable. And these are people who are building friendships with other listeners because they listen to the same podcasts. And that's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible as you mentioned, these listening communities that are beginning to prop up and have these unofficial meetups. And you're right, Daniel, when I sit there and I'm listening to people that I've never met before and having a really strong connection with them and literally sitting at my desk, just like staring into space thinking, man, I'm totally engrossed in this conversation or this debate or this topic. And that's something that I have never been able to feel. When we go to different podcast conferences per se, whether it's this International Podcast Day event, whether we're going to Podcast Movement, regional meetups, whatever it is, it's kind of like a family reunion, and everybody's really excited to see each other. There's hugs, there's high fives, or hey, let me buy you a drink at the bar afterwards. Hey, let me pick up your lunch tab, whatever it is. But that's exactly what it's like. We're a great community, despite being in the same space where, yes, we are going to compete against each other for profits, for attention, for downloads, all those things. But ultimately, you know what we're doing? We're all working towards growing the podcast space. That is growing the momentum, the movement behind it, celebrating it day in and day out, week in and week out, and getting out there and evangelizing podcasts. And I think that is the thing that we need to keep at the top of our agenda is we are pushing this forward for the podcast space. It's for you, it's for me, it's for our listeners, it's for every new podcaster out there, and it's for every new podcast listener that's going to find their favorite podcast. You listen to one podcast a week, welcome to the family. If you listen to 14 podcasts a day, welcome to the family. It doesn't matter how often you listen, how many times you download, whether you listen through the entire podcast, fast forward through some segments, don't listen to the ads, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You're here. You are part of the community. You're part of the reason this media continues to grow. And as we talked about at the top of the hour, in 2014, when we said, hey, let's have a day of celebration. And now we've gone a few years later to celebrating a variety of podcasters and from a variety of different regions around the world. That's what the space is doing. And it's because all of us are in it together. And that's exactly why it continues to push forward and why next year, podcasting is going to be bigger. In 2019, it's going to be bigger. I'm just anxious to see where it's going over the next 5-10 years. And it's with the help of everybody out there that's listening now, that will listen to these YouTube recordings after. And it's for everybody that downloads an episode in the future. That's really what the event and our celebration is all about.
So you're allowed to do 4 things on International Podcast Day, besides eating and sleeping, which sleeping is optional. Number 1, watch the International Podcast Day stream, participate in International Podcast Day in some way. Number 2, create a podcast. Number 3, listen to a podcast. Or number 4, go find someone and talk about podcasts with them. Those are the 4 things you're allowed to do on this celebration.
It's pretty straightforward. Those are the 4 things. That is your homework for the next 30 plus hours or however long your International Podcast Day celebration lasts. Absolutely. I love those, Daniel.
Just real quick, guys, because I just noticed it, and it's worth noting. In our chat room is our silver sponsor, Potable. So please, in the chat room, tell them thank you for helping us this year put on the event. And also, Dave, I just mentioned him a little bit ago that he's taken on providing our audio only stream. So he's in the chat room right now with Echoplex. So please tell him thank you. I'd really appreciate it. And one more quick shout out, and we'll get into what's coming up. And that is, I'd like to thank Neil Pollock of Audiogram at getaudiogram.com. He has created some stuff for us this year. Fortunately, we kind of connected too late and weren't able to really get going what we wanted to, but we're certainly looking forward to working with Neil in the future. So there's a couple of things that are critical because we're starting to chunk down on time here. Whatever you do, every year we have trended number one on every social media platform, and we're going to do it again, by golly. And that is to use the hashtag International Podcast Day on everything you do. Go to internationalpodcastday.com/promotion, and there you can find social media images, audio, banners that you can display, and something that we're kind of testing with, and please test it for us. We have social media thank you cards. So if there is a podcast or podcaster that you truly appreciate, you can use the International Podcast Day thank you card to send them over social media. Come up with your own unique ideas over the next 30 hours and let us know, and perhaps we'll be able to mention it during the show. 14 countries, 50 presenters. It's going to be amazing over the next 31 hours. We have a lot of content to get to. So please share it, because that is what we're about. We're about sharing podcasting. We're about evangelizing, like we talked about. So Dave, if you would, briefly, I know it's kind of hard, but could you just briefly go down the schedule and let people know what's coming down the pike?
Absolutely. We have some amazing content lined up. As Steve has mentioned, I mentioned 14 different countries, including Australia, Taiwan, Thailand, China, New Zealand, Canada, Ireland, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Philippines, Ghana. What else? In the United States, Puerto Rico, Finland, South Africa. We have so many countries represented. It's going to be amazing. We have a good, diverse group of speakers coming. And if you're interested, Steve, like I said, we're running short on time. Just hit up internationalpodcastday.com/schedule. I've dropped that in the chat room, and we'll continue to drop it throughout. But if you're interested in hearing unique perspectives from around the globe, make sure you check out sessions like James Thomas's Podcasting in the Asian Region. Also, Evo Terra is going to be talking about the process of podcasting has nothing to do with audio editing, and some other cool stuff. Kai, who does a podcast called The Great Podcast from Ghana, is going to be talking about the African woman owning our narrative through podcasting. Sounds like a fantastic session. Also from the Philippines, we have Isa Perez. She's going to talk about how she started her own podcast through Facebook Live through a third world internet connection. And everybody, these are stories that you are not going to hear at a podcast conference. This is the day we come to celebrate and talk about why Larry in Zimbabwe is going to be talking about starting a podcast in an environment that didn't care for one. What does that mean to you as a podcaster? So you're going to get very unique perspectives on what is going on in the podcasting space, both domestically, internationally, wherever it may be. And so make sure you check out internationalpodcastday.com/schedule. Check out all the speaker bios that we have. We have some amazing, talented podcasters coming to the space. And of course, invite your friends, your family, your podcast listening buddies to the stream, and we'll drop the link as well. But yeah, we have an amazing schedule lined up, Steve. We're really excited to bring it to you this year.
So most importantly, when we talk about International Podcast Day, let me be real frank. It's not about me. It's not about Daniel. It's not about Dave. It's not about you. It's about all of us. It's a community. It's a worldwide new look at what we're doing in the world of podcasting. And I want you to keep that in mind, because we can go day to day, and not progress or advance our movement within the podcast industry. It is one-on-one communication, like Daniel was talking about. It's one to many. It's many of those. That's how we change the world. And as I talked about in the very opening, please, we have a humanitarian crisis going on around the world with many disasters. Please, podcasters helping people. I want you to remember that, because I know that we are all very, very passionate people, or we wouldn't podcast. It takes passion to podcast. It takes passion to be a podcaster. It takes passion to be a community member. And it takes passion to help others. So I really hope you will consider that. So as we start to wind down here, we've got an amazing amount of time. But next time you see us, we will not be clean shaven. We will have our hats on backwards. We'll probably have stains on our shirts, and we will have severe bags more than I have now, because it's a long time that we're going to be broadcasting, and it's our pleasure to do so. So Daniel, as we start to finalize here, can you kind of explain what's going on with our stream and YouTube, and what viewers will should expect?
We've designed this, and this is super cutting edge beta technology. This did not exist before now. So if you are a YouTube live streamer, you might love what we've worked on, because this will be a public plugin that you'll be able to use. But you should be able to stay here on internationalpodcastday.com/live and see all 30 hours of separate YouTube live events. There may be an occasional time, I'll just say, hedging here in case it might happen, there may be an occasional time we'll have to ask you to refresh, especially if you pop in right at this little moment of non-magical moment. But besides that, most likely you'll be able to just stay here. So when one event ends, you don't have to refresh your browser. You don't have to go anywhere else. You can just park yourself here on internationalpodcastday.com/live. And each event will come to you automatically, auto playing and going from one event to the next.
I lost my mouse there for a minute, and most people say, Steve, would you mute yourself? But this time I really need to talk. But hey, listen, I want to thank the both of you once again. It was only a week ago that we found out some news about our plan that we had been working months and months and months for, to produce our event. I would really like to throw them under the bus, to be real honest with you, but I'm not going to, because in a way, perhaps this has worked out better in terms of what we're going to do in the future. And as Daniel was talking about, we really had to unload the barn to be able to produce it this year. So your dedication is just amazing, and I love you both so much for it. So next, we are actually going to skip from here over to Australia, where it is September 30 already. And we have some amazing content that you're really going to love. You know, one of the things the three of us constantly talk about is, it is so neat to see what people are doing from around the world. Because a lot of times we live in a community, or it could be in some type of local forum, and we really don't see what's going on around the world. And we're going to find that out over the next, not few hours, quite a few hours. So Dave, last words.
We love you all. Make sure you get out there, use hashtag International Podcast Day. I'm serious. Without this event, your support from the podcast and podcasting community, this event is nothing. We can go out there and we can grab podcasters from every different region. We line up a fantastic event with fantastic information and content for you. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for year in and year out joining our celebration, celebrating the craft that we love, uniting us as podcasters and podcast listeners. So on behalf of the group here, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your continued support, and happy International Podcast Day, everybody.
And for all of the people who will be coming and presenting to these messages with you, please share them out. You can be that evangelist to send out the tweet, send out a new tweet every time there's a new speaker. Make sure you're adding the hashtag International Podcast Day to it. Share it out on Facebook, on Twitter, wherever you can share that. Hey, feel free to also Instagram little moments or get little audio snippets from the great content that's being shared here. Everything you post on social, make sure you use that official hashtag International Podcast Day. Yes, it's long, but it explains everything that it is. And enjoy all of this great content from these amazing people from around the world that's coming up really soon.
Great. So we are actually going to prepare for the next session with Anna Marie. And Daniel, I don't know if you've seen the chat, she's already having this issue. So I'm going to relinquish this over to you for the next session, and we'll see what we can do. And really, people, thanks for being here. Happy International Podcast Day. Take care.